He found them unconscious in the snow. What he did next changed their lives forever. White heavy check mark. James, an ordinary man with an extraordinary habit of exploring the outdoors, had decided to take a walk along a mountain trail he had never fully explored before. He loved nature, the quiet of the forests, and the crunch of snow beneath his boots. But this day, the forest seemed different. The sky had a strange gray tint, and the clouds hung low, almost pressing down on the snow-covered trees. Each breath he took formed clouds of mist that quickly disappeared into the icy air. The path ahead was uneven and slippery, and James had to watch every step carefully. But he felt alive, energized by the crisp air and the solitude. He had been walking for over an hour when something unusual caught his eye. At first he thought it was just a patch of snow or a fallen branch, but as he got closer, a sense of unease settled in his chest. There, partially buried under the thick layer of snow, were two small shapes. They didn't move, and the sight of them made his heart skip a beat. He quickened his pace, his boots sinking slightly into the fresh snow, and called out, "Hello, are you okay?" The silence that followed made his stomach tighten. When he reached them, James realized the shapes were two children, a boy and a girl, no older than 10 and 8. Their clothes were thin, not enough for the freezing temperature, and their tiny faces were pale. They were lying close together, almost huddled, but it was clear they were unconscious. Snow clung to their hair and coats, and the cold had already started to seep into their skin. Panic surged through James, but he knew he couldn't waste a second. He dropped to his knees beside them, brushing the snow off their faces and bodies as carefully as he could. "Stay with me," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if they could hear him. He felt a deep, urgent responsibility for these strangers, and he knew that any hesitation could cost them their lives. His hands were numb from the cold, but he forced himself to move quickly, lifting their small bodies gently and trying to keep them from sliding back into the snow. James knew he had to get them warm fast. He took off his own scarf and wrapped it around the little girl, pressing his own body against hers to share warmth. Then he did the same for the boy, wrapping him in his coat and pulling him close. The children were so cold that their small bodies felt like ice beneath his fingers. James' own coat was no match for the winter storm, but he ignored the discomfort. His mind was focused only on keeping the children alive. He dug a small hollow in the snow, just enough to shield them from the biting wind. Every movement felt like it took forever, and the cold crept into his bones, but James refused to give up. He whispered words of encouragement, telling the children that help was coming, that they were safe now. Even if they couldn't hear him, he needed to speak, to remind himself that he had to stay calm. Panic, he knew, would only make things worse. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, James managed to pull out his phone. His fingers were stiff and clumsy from the cold, but he dialed emergency services as fast as he could. The ringing seemed to stretch on endlessly, and James' heart pounded in his chest. When a voice finally answered, he explained the situation as clearly and quickly as possible, giving the exact location and describing the children's condition. The dispatcher's calm voice gave him a small measure of relief, but he knew he still had a long wait ahead. While he waited, James continued to hold the children close. He rubbed their arms and legs gently, trying to stimulate circulation. He checked for breathing, feeling a small, shallow rise in their chests. It was faint, but it was enough to give him hope. He whispered their names. He didn't know them, but it felt right to speak to them as individuals, to make a connection, however fragile. "You're going to be okay," he said repeatedly, hoping his words would reach them in some way. The wind howled around him, rattling the trees and making the snow swirl in the air like tiny ghosts. James could feel the cold seeping through his gloves and coat, but he didn't think about his own discomfort. Every moment that passed, every second, felt critical. He reminded himself to stay calm, to think clearly, to act carefully. His mind raced with what he had learned from first aid classes years ago. He kept checking their pulse, watching their breathing, and gently repositioning them to make sure they didn't slip further into the snow. As the minutes dragged on, James noticed something that gave him a slight sense of hope. The children's fingers twitched slightly, and the boys' eyelids fluttered. It was a small sign, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to keep him going. He continued talking to them, describing the surroundings, telling stories, anything to keep a thread of connection alive. He imagined the warmth of a fire, the safety of a home, and repeated it over and over, hoping that comfort and hope might reach them even in their unconscious state. Finally, far in the distance, he heard the faint sound of sirens. Relief surged through him, but he didn't move the children yet. He waited until the paramedics arrived, careful not to jostle them. When they reached the clearing, James quickly explained everything: their condition, how long they had been there, and what he had done to keep them alive. The paramedics acted quickly, lifting the children gently and wrapping them in thermal blankets. James followed closely, making sure they were stable and still breathing. As they were carried to the ambulance, James couldn't stop thinking about the fragility of life and how quickly it could change. One moment, the children were unconscious and at risk. The next, they were alive, thanks to his actions. He realized that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about acting despite fear, about putting others before yourself when it mattered most. The winter evening that had begun like any other had turned into a moment that would stay with him forever. Even as the ambulance drove away, James remained on the snow-covered trail for a few minutes, taking deep breaths and letting the adrenaline fade. He looked at the swirling snowflakes and felt a quiet satisfaction. He had acted, and that action had mattered. He knew the children's journey to recovery was just beginning, but at that moment they were safe, and he had been the one to make that possible. James walked back down the trail slowly, each step crunching in the snow, thinking about the unexpected events of the night. He had gone out seeking solitude and adventure, but he had found something far more profound, a sense of purpose, a reminder that even a single person's actions could make an incredible difference in the lives of others. The forest was quiet again, but for James, the memory of the children's fragile, unconscious forms would never fade. He knew that life was unpredictable, and sometimes it demanded courage in the most unexpected ways. And on that cold winter evening, he had discovered the true power of human compassion. The sound of the approaching sirens was a small blessing in the otherwise silent, snow-covered forest. James could see the flashing lights bouncing off the trees as the paramedics navigated the narrow trail, their voices calling out instructions over the wind. His heart raced, not from fear this time, but from hope. Help had arrived, and the children's lives were about to change because of it. Yet even as relief surged through him, James knew that his role was far from over. Every second counted, and he could not leave until he was certain they were safe. The paramedics quickly assessed the situation. 2 children, hypothermia, partially conscious, one of them said, scanning the scene as he moved closer. James stepped back slightly but stayed nearby, giving the professionals space while explaining everything he had done. "I kept them warm as best I could," he said, "and I wrapped them in my coat and scarf. I kept talking to them, checking their breathing." The paramedic nodded, taking notes, his hands steady and efficient despite the frigid air. With great care, they lifted the children onto a stretcher, wrapping them in thick thermal blankets that instantly began to take away some of the icy chill from their small bodies. James felt a mix of relief and lingering worry. He had done everything he could, but he knew the next phase was crucial. Hypothermia could still be dangerous even when someone was conscious, and only medical attention could ensure their full safety. He followed the ambulance as it carefully made its way down the winding trail, walking alongside the paramedics to make sure the children were secure. Inside the ambulance, The air was warm and filled with the low hum of the engine. James watched as the children's tiny chests rose and fell with each breath. The paramedics worked quickly, taking their temperature and monitoring their pulse. The boy's eyes fluttered open briefly, revealing confusion and fear, while the girl remained unconscious, her body trembling despite the blankets. James leaned closer, speaking softly. "You're safe now. Everything's going to be okay." He wasn't sure they could understand him fully, but he continued to speak, believing that his presence offered some comfort. The ambulance bounced along the icy road, but the paramedics remained focused and calm. They administered warm fluids through an IV and carefully monitored the children's vital signs. James felt a sense of awe at their professionalism and dedication. In that moment, he realized that saving lives was never just about one person. It was about teamwork, skill, and the willingness to act. Yet, he also knew that without his initial intervention, the children might not have survived long enough for this help to arrive. As the ambulance approached the hospital, James could see the glow of the building through the snowy night. The paramedics coordinated with the emergency room staff over the radio, ensuring that doctors were ready to receive the children immediately. When the doors of the ambulance opened, the cold air hit him again, but he barely noticed. The children were being carried on stretchers into the warmth and safety of the hospital, and James followed closely, wanting to stay with them until they were completely stable. Inside the hospital, the atmosphere shifted from the quiet tension of the forest to a controlled, urgent energy. Doctors and nurses worked quickly to assess the children, checking their temperature, heart rate, and responsiveness. James waited in the hallway, pacing slightly, trying to stay calm as he watched them being wheeled away. He felt helpless at first, wishing he could do more, but he reminded himself that he had done everything possible to get them to this point. Hours seemed to stretch endlessly. James remained near the hospital, sipping hot tea from a vending machine while his mind replayed the events of the night. He thought about the children's small, frozen hands, their pale faces, and the fear he had seen in their eyes. He remembered the moment he found them lying in the snow, and a wave of gratitude washed over him. He had been able to act quickly, to stay calm, and to make a difference in ways he could never have imagined before that cold winter evening. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a nurse came out to speak to him. "They're stable now," she said, smiling softly. "The children are warming up and they're beginning to respond. You can see them if you like, but only for a short time. They need rest." James felt a rush of relief. He followed her down the hall, his steps careful, and entered the room where the children lay. The boy was sitting up slightly, his eyes wide with confusion and fear, but also with a hint of recognition. The girl was still lying down, her small hand clutching the edge of the blanket. James knelt beside the boy, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It's okay," he said. "You're safe now, I'm here." The boy's eyes softened slightly and he gave a small nod. Though he was still weak, there was a spark of life returning, and that spark was enough to give James hope. Over the next few hours, the children gradually became more aware of their surroundings. The girl opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the bright hospital lights. She looked around, confused at first, but when she saw James, a small smile appeared on her lips. He smiled back, relieved that they recognized him, even in this strange, sterile environment. The doctors and nurses continued to monitor them closely, adjusting their blankets, checking their vital signs, and offering warm drinks. James stayed by their side, speaking softly, telling stories about the snowy forest, the little animals that lived there, and how brave they had been. It was in these quiet moments that James realized the depth of the bond that had already formed between him and the children. He had been a stranger moments before, yet now he was the person they trusted in a terrifying situation. The fear in their eyes had slowly been replaced by trust, a trust that he knew he would honor for as long as they needed him. He felt a profound sense of responsibility and an even deeper sense of purpose. By the time night fully descended, the children were resting comfortably, their bodies finally warming and their breathing steady. James stepped outside for a brief moment, feeling the chill of the winter night on his face. The sky was clear now, stars twinkling faintly above the mountains. He thought about how fragile life could be, how quickly circumstances could change, and how a single moment of courage and action could alter the course of someone's life forever. Even though exhaustion weighed heavily on him, James stayed near the hospital through the night. He wanted to make sure the children were truly safe, and he wanted to witness the first steps of their recovery. The hours passed slowly, but he never left their side, offering comfort, reassurance, and presence, the things that no medical procedure could fully provide. By morning, the children were awake, smiling weakly but genuinely. Their parents had arrived, their faces etched with worry and relief. Tears flowed freely as they hugged their children, grateful for the miracle that had saved them. James watched quietly, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. He had acted without hesitation, without thought of reward or recognition, and in doing so, he had helped bring a family back together. The paramedics, doctors, and nurses all praised James for his quick thinking and bravery, but he brushed off their compliments, feeling that he had simply done what anyone would have done in his place. Yet he could not ignore the truth. His actions had mattered. They had mattered in a way that would be remembered by the children, their parents, and even the community that would eventually hear of this story. As the children rested and regained their strength, James finally allowed himself a moment to reflect. He realized that this night would stay with him forever, not because of fear or danger, but because of the life-affirming power of human compassion. He had seen the impact one person could make when they acted selflessly, and he had felt the incredible weight of responsibility and the immeasurable reward of helping others in need. By the time the sun rose, casting a golden glow over the snowy landscape, the children were well on their way to recovery. James left the hospital quietly, his heart full but his mind calm. He knew that life would continue, that challenges would come, but he also knew that courage, compassion, and quick action could change lives in ways no one could predict. The night in the snow had begun with fear and uncertainty, but it had ended with hope, safety, and the beginning of a new chapter for the children, thanks to his determination and care. After the children had been admitted to the hospital, the environment shifted from the hurried urgency of the ambulance to the calm, focused care of the emergency room. The nurses moved with practiced efficiency, adjusting blankets, checking temperatures, and ensuring that the children were slowly gaining warmth. The room was quiet except for the low hum of machines, the occasional murmur of a nurse, and the soft footsteps of doctors making their rounds. James remained nearby, standing quietly by the side of the bed, watching every movement, feeling a mix of relief and anxious concern. The little boy, still pale but more alert than when James had first found him in the snow, shifted slightly under the thick blanket. His eyes, wide and curious, darted around the room as if he were taking in a world he had almost left behind. He looked at James and tried to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. Where are we?" James leaned closer, speaking softly. "You're safe now. You're in the hospital. You're going to be okay." The boy nodded slowly, still weak, but beginning to trust that the warmth surrounding him meant he was out of danger. The girl, smaller and quieter, remained lying down, her tiny body trembling slightly from residual cold. James placed a hand gently on her arm, rubbing softly to provide warmth and comfort. "It's okay," he said again. "I'm here with you. You're safe." She opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the bright hospital lights. When her gaze met James, a flicker of recognition crossed her face. She gave a faint smile, and though it was small, it was enough to reassure him that she understood he had been there to help her. The doctors came in one by one, explaining their procedures to James in a calm and professional tone. They spoke of hypothermia, dehydration, and mild frostbite, explaining that the children would need rest, fluids, and careful monitoring over the next few days. James listened intently, absorbing every word, knowing that these instructions were vital for their recovery. He asked questions about how long they might need to stay, what signs to watch for, and how he could continue to help them feel safe during the recovery process. The doctors appreciated his concern and assured him that he had already played the most important role, getting them out of the cold quickly and keeping them alive until medical help arrived. Hours passed slowly, the children gradually regaining strength as their bodies absorbed warmth and fluids. James continued to sit by their side, telling them stories in soft, steady tones. He spoke of the mountains, the forest animals, and even little adventures he had experienced on his own. He wanted to provide a sense of normalcy, to remind them that the world outside was still safe, despite the terrifying moments they had endured. The children listened quietly, occasionally asking questions or giggling softly at something James said. Those small sounds of life, simple and pure, brought him a sense of relief he could barely describe. As evening approached, the parents finally arrived at the hospital. The children's mother, her face pale and lined with worry, rushed to her children, holding them close. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she hugged them tightly, whispering words of comfort and love. The father, equally shaken, stood nearby, his hand resting on the mother's shoulder, his eyes never leaving the children. James watched quietly from a short distance, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and humility. He had played a crucial role in saving these children, but now their family was taking over, offering the warmth and love that only parents could provide. The parents expressed endless gratitude to James, their voices trembling as they thanked him over and over. "You saved our children," the mother said, her voice breaking. "We can never repay you." James shook his head gently, smiling softly. "I didn't do it for thanks," he said. "I did what anyone would do. I'm just glad they're safe." But deep down, he felt a quiet pride. He had acted with courage and clarity when it mattered most, and the knowledge that their lives had been saved gave him a sense of purpose unlike anything he had ever experienced. Over the next few days, James stayed in touch with the family, checking in on the children and visiting when he could. Each visit revealed progress, brighter eyes, stronger voices, and more energy as the children regained strength. The boy was the first to return to his usual playful self, smiling and joking with James about his snow adventure. The girl, initially quiet and reserved, gradually warmed up, laughing softly and joining in the conversations. Each small sign of recovery brought immense relief to James, confirming that the night in the snow, terrifying as it had been, was truly behind them. The hospital staff, too, recognized James' efforts. They praised him for his quick thinking, his calm presence, and his determination to keep the children alive until professional help could take over. Yet, true to his nature, James remained modest. He never sought recognition or reward. For him, the reward was simple, the knowledge that 2 lives had been saved and that he had made a difference when it truly mattered. As the children's health improved, the family began to discuss ways to help them process the trauma of that night. James was included in these conversations, his presence offering reassurance not only to the children, but to the parents as well. Together, they talked about the importance of remembering the experience not as a moment of fear, but as a story of survival, courage, and human kindness. The children learned that the world could be safe again, and that even in the darkest moments, help could come from unexpected places. One afternoon, as James sat with the children, they asked him questions about that night in the snow. "Were you scared?" the boy asked. James smiled gently. "Yes, I was a little scared," he admitted, "but I knew I had to help you. That's what kept me going." The children listened intently, absorbing the lesson of courage and compassion. They realized that fear was natural, but bravery meant acting even when you were afraid. These lessons, taught through experience rather than words alone, would stay with them forever. The days turned into a week, and the children were finally ready to leave the hospital. The family prepared to return home, bringing with them the knowledge that life had given them a second chance. James accompanied them to the door, helping with bags and offering final words of encouragement. "Remember," he said, "you are strong and you are brave. And never forget that kindness exists in the world. It can come from anyone, even a stranger in the forest." The children hugged him tightly, their small arms wrapping around him with trust and gratitude. As they left, James felt a mixture of joy and melancholy. He had grown attached to the children, and part of him wished he could have stayed longer, continued to watch them grow and thrive. Yet he knew that his role, while critical, had been temporary. The family would now provide the love, guidance, and care they needed to heal fully. He watched them walk away into the snowy landscape, their small figures gradually disappearing into the distance, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. That night, James returned to his own home, reflecting on the events of the past days. The experience had changed him. He had always cared about helping others, but he now understood the true weight and power of human action. A single person, acting with courage and compassion, could alter the course of multiple lives. The children, their parents, the paramedics, and even James himself had all been touched in ways that would last a lifetime. As he looked out at the snowy streets of his town, he thought about the fragility of life and the importance of being present in moments of need. That night in the snow had been a turning point, not just for the children but for him as well. He realized that life was unpredictable and that every day presented opportunities to make a difference, however small. But sometimes those opportunities were monumental, and they required immediate action, selflessness, and courage. James never sought fame or recognition for what he had done. He returned to his daily routines, quietly continuing his life with a new perspective. But the memory of the children's faces, the gratitude in their parents' eyes, and the relief of seeing them safe remained with him always. It was a story of human resilience, the power of quick thinking, and the undeniable impact one person could have in a critical moment. And while the hospital rooms had grown quiet and the children had returned home, James knew that his actions that night had set in motion a chain of events that would affect lives far beyond what he could see. The experience had taught him that courage was not just in heroic acts, but in everyday choices, to act, to care, and to extend oneself to those in need. That night, what began as a terrifying encounter in the snow had become a profound lesson in humanity, hope, and the enduring power of kindness. The days and weeks that followed the children's rescue brought a mixture of relief, joy, and quiet reflection for everyone involved. The immediate danger was behind them, but the impact of that snowy night was far from over. For James, it was a period of introspection. He had acted on instinct, without hesitation, yet now he began to understand the ripple effect of his actions. The children's survival had changed more than just their lives. It had touched the hearts of the entire community. Word of James' bravery spread slowly at first, whispered among neighbors, friends, and colleagues who had learned about the dramatic rescue. The story was simple but powerful. A man walking alone in the mountains had discovered two children unconscious in the snow and had acted quickly to save them. People admired the courage it took to face such a dangerous situation calmly, but James remained humble. He never sought attention or accolades. For him, the reward was knowing the children were alive, and that knowledge gave him a quiet, deep satisfaction. The children's parents invited James to their home several times after their discharge from the hospital. Each visit was filled with warmth, gratitude, and careful attempts to bridge the gap between their traumatic experience and a sense of normalcy. The boy and girl had regained their energy, their laughter returning slowly but steadily. Seeing them eat, play, and interact as children should brought immense relief to James, as well as a sense of pride that he had been part of their journey back to safety. During one visit, the children's mother asked James to sit with them while she prepared lunch. As he played simple games with the children and helped them with small tasks, he noticed the subtle ways the event had left its mark. The boy was slightly more cautious when venturing outside, glancing at the snow with a mix of curiosity and wariness. The girl, usually shy, clung more often to James' hand, seeking reassurance. James understood. Trauma leaves invisible footprints, and patience, love, and consistency were the best ways to help the children heal. Over time, James found that the children's trust in him had grown into something deeper than admiration or gratitude. He became a quiet mentor, someone they could look to for guidance, encouragement, and reassurance. He didn't lecture them or force lessons. Instead, he taught through example, showing the importance of kindness, courage, and empathy in everyday life. Even the simplest interactions, a story, a shared laugh, or a walk in the nearby park, became meaningful opportunities for the children to learn and grow. The family, too, began to heal in ways that were both visible and subtle. The parents, initially overwhelmed with fear and guilt for what had happened, gradually embraced the experience as a story of resilience. They were open about discussing the night in the snow, emphasizing survival, hope, and human kindness rather than fear. They wanted the children to remember the event not as a nightmare, but as a moment when strangers became heroes and the world showed its compassion. Community interest in the story increased. Local newspapers and online platforms shared accounts of James' actions, and neighbors often stopped him in the street to express their admiration. James, however, remained modest, always redirecting praise to the children's resilience and the efforts of emergency responders. He emphasized that anyone could act in such circumstances if they remained calm, observant, and willing to help. His humility only deepened the respect people felt toward him, reinforcing the lesson that heroism is often quiet, patient, and grounded in service rather than attention. One evening, as snow began to fall lightly over the town, James took the children for a walk in the park near their home. They laughed as they ran through the freshly fallen snow, making small footprints and gentle snowballs. The boy turned to him and asked, "Do you think we'll ever have to be in danger like that again?" James smiled gently, kneeling down to meet their eyes. "Life is full of surprises," he said softly. "Sometimes we face scary moments, but what matters is how we respond. You were both brave, and remember, you now know how to help each other." The children nodded, absorbing the lesson in their own quiet way. As the months passed, James' influence on the family grew more significant, though always subtle. He encouraged small adventures and explorations with care, teaching the children how to enjoy nature safely. He instilled in them an appreciation for preparation, caution, and awareness, without instilling fear. The boy, once timid, began to show signs of confidence and initiative. The girl became more outgoing, curious, and willing to try new things. Their personalities, once slightly constrained by trauma, began to flourish, and James quietly celebrated these milestones as though they were his own. The bond between James and the children also affected their parents in positive ways. They recognized that this man, who had been a stranger months ago, was now a guardian figure in their lives, a source of calm and wisdom, someone who embodied courage and compassion. His presence provided reassurance, not just to the children but to the family as a whole. Through this relationship, the parents also began to heal, finding hope and strength in the continued recovery and joy of their children. At school, the children shared their experiences cautiously, focusing on the positive lessons rather than the frightening aspects. Their friends were curious, asking countless questions about the night in the snow, and the children recounted the story with honesty and grace, emphasizing the courage of the stranger who had saved them. Teachers and classmates expressed admiration, and slowly, the story of survival became a source of inspiration within the community. The children learned that adversity could be transformed into strength, and that compassion could leave a lasting impact on lives. James, meanwhile, continued his quiet routines. He never sought recognition, never pushed himself into the spotlight, yet his actions had changed countless lives beyond what he could see. The children's gratitude was evident, their parents' relief and admiration constant reminders of the difference a single act of courage could make. And as he moved through his days, James reflected on how fragile life could be, and yet how strong it could become when people acted with care, determination, and love. One afternoon, as they sat by the riverbank, the children asked James about the night in the snow once more. They wanted to understand why he had risked so much to help them. James paused, looking at the flowing water, and then said, "Because it was the right thing to do. Everyone deserves help when they need it, and I knew you needed me." It wasn't about being brave, it was about being human. Courage is simply caring enough to act when it matters. The children nodded thoughtfully, slowly understanding that heroism could be quiet and selfless, and that compassion was a powerful force in the world. Through these months, the experience in the snow transformed not only the children but also James and their entire community. People began to see examples of courage and empathy differently. They recognized that acts of kindness, even small ones, could have profound effects. And while James continued to live quietly, the lessons he taught through his actions became enduring examples for the children, their parents, and the wider town. Even now, years later, the memory of that night would remain vivid. The children would remember the cold, the fear, and the vulnerability, but also the warmth, the care, and the bravery of the man who had saved them. For James, the experience left a quiet sense of purpose and fulfillment. He had acted in a moment of need, and in doing so, he had helped shape a family's future. The snowy night had been terrifying, but it had also been life-changing in ways that extended far beyond the immediate danger. As winter turned to spring, the children continued to thrive, exploring the world with a renewed sense of confidence and curiosity. They laughed freely, played without fear, and embraced life with the resilience they had learned during that critical moment. James remained a constant presence, guiding, teaching, and caring without imposing, and in this gentle way, he helped shape their understanding of courage, compassion, and humanity. Ultimately, the snowy night had left a permanent imprint, not just on the children, but on everyone who had witnessed or heard the story. James' actions reminded the town that heroism could come from ordinary people, that courage could appear in unexpected moments, and that the smallest act of care could change lives forever. The rescue was more than a single event. It became a symbol of hope, kindness, and the enduring power of human connection. The weeks and months following the children's rescue had already brought significant changes, but the final stage of the story was the one that would leave a lasting mark on everyone involved. James, once a quiet man who enjoyed solitary walks in the forest, now found himself connected in unexpected ways to the children and their family. The bond that had begun in a moment of crisis had grown into something enduring, a relationship built on trust, respect, and shared experience. The children were thriving. Each day they became more confident, more curious, and more willing to embrace the world around them. The boy, once timid and fearful, was now eager to explore small adventures with James, learning to climb trees carefully, observe wildlife, and enjoy nature safely. The girl, once quiet and cautious, was now laughing more, sharing her thoughts openly, and experimenting with small creative projects like drawing snow scenes and making little stories about animals. James marveled at their resilience, understanding that the trauma of that cold night had shaped them but had not defined them. The family, too, had grown stronger. The parents expressed their gratitude in countless ways, inviting James into family traditions, celebrations, and everyday routines. They respected his humility, understanding that his presence was more than just a single heroic act. It had become a constant source of reassurance and guidance. For them, James was not just the man who had saved their children's lives. He was now a part of the family, a figure who embodied courage, kindness, and selflessness. One evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, the children excitedly shared stories about their school day. They spoke about friends, games, and small triumphs, and every now and then, their conversation returned to James' lessons. "We climbed the hill in the park today," the boy said. "I remembered what you taught me about being careful and watching out for each other." The girl added, "And I helped my friend when she fell." "I thought about what you said about kindness." James smiled quietly, realizing that the impact of that snowy night had extended far beyond the immediate danger. The lessons of courage, compassion, and human connection were becoming part of their daily lives. James also noticed the subtle changes in himself. The experience had deepened his understanding of human resilience and the ways in which small acts could ripple through lives. He had always believed in helping others, but now he understood the profound effect of presence, patience, and consistency. Heroism, he realized, was not always dramatic. It was often quiet, patient, and grounded in genuine care. He had saved lives that night, yes, but he had also helped shape a family's future in ways that could not be measured. The children's recovery and growth became a source of inspiration for the entire community. Neighbors, teachers, and friends spoke about the rescue, about James' bravery, and about the children's resilience. They shared lessons about courage, kindness, and human connection, and slowly the story became more than a tale of survival. It became a symbol of hope. People learned that ordinary individuals could make extraordinary differences when they acted selflessly, with courage and compassion. As winter returned the following year, the children wanted to revisit the forest where they had been found. With careful preparation and James' guidance, they returned to the trail. The snow was thick, but the children were properly dressed, alert, and aware of their surroundings. James walked alongside them, pointing out familiar landmarks and explaining how to stay safe in cold conditions. This time, the forest was no longer a place of fear. It had become a place of growth, learning, and connection. The children laughed as they stepped carefully over icy patches, threw snowballs at each other, and marveled at the beauty of the winter landscape. During this visit, the children reflected on their experience. "We were so scared that night," the girl admitted, her voice small but steady. "But you helped us. You stayed with us." James knelt to meet their eyes, smiling softly. "Yes," he said, "and now you are stronger. You faced fear and you survived. That bravery is inside you always. Remember it." The boy nodded, feeling a sense of pride and confidence he had never felt before. The forest, once a place of danger, had become a classroom for courage, resilience, and the power of human connection. The community's recognition of James' actions continued quietly. While he never sought praise, the story of the snowy night became part of the local lore, shared during community gatherings, school assemblies, and even casual conversations. People admired the courage it took to act without hesitation, but they also recognized the humility and humanity that James displayed. He became a subtle role model, demonstrating that true heroism was about service and care, not recognition or reward. Meanwhile, the children flourished academically, socially, and emotionally. They approached challenges with confidence, supported by the lessons they had learned through experience. Their parents were vigilant, nurturing, and patient, but they also knew that James' presence had played a critical role in their children's growth. His influence was not overbearing. It was steady, supportive, and filled with genuine care. Through small interactions, sharing stories, teaching lessons about safety, encouraging empathy, James helped the children internalize values that would serve them throughout their lives. One afternoon, as they walked together through a local park, the boy turned to James and asked, "Do you think everyone can be brave like you?" James paused, thinking carefully. "Bravery isn't about being fearless," he said. "It's about doing the right thing, even when you are afraid. Everyone can be brave. You just have to care enough to act when it matters." The girl listened intently, nodding. She understood in her own quiet way that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. These lessons, learned firsthand, would remain with them forever. The months turned into years, and the children's lives continued to unfold with joy, growth, and resilience. James remained a part of their story, attending birthdays, school events, and family celebrations. Each visit reinforced the bond they shared, a bond rooted in trust, gratitude, and a shared experience that had shaped all of their lives. For James, these moments brought quiet fulfillment. He had saved their lives, yes, but he had also helped nurture their growth, confidence, and understanding of compassion. As the children matured, they began to reflect on the lessons of that snowy night with a deeper understanding. They realized that the fear they had experienced was temporary, but the courage, kindness, and human connection they had witnessed and felt would remain with them forever. They also understood the importance of helping others, of taking action in critical moments, and of showing care and empathy in everyday life. James' influence had become a guiding force in their development, shaping not only who they were, but also who they would become. For James, the story did not end with the children's recovery or the community's recognition. It became a personal reminder of the power of human action. He continued to explore, help others when opportunities arose, and live with the awareness that life's moments often demanded courage, compassion, and quick thinking. The snowy night had been terrifying, yes, but it had also been transformative. It had reminded him, and everyone it touched, that a single act of care could ripple through lives in ways that could never be fully measured. In quiet moments, James often thought about that night. He remembered the cold, the fear, and the urgency, but also the warmth, the connection, and the relief of seeing the children safe. He knew that life was unpredictable, that danger could appear suddenly, and that courage could take many forms. But he also knew that human kindness, quick thinking, and steadfast care could change destinies in a single instant. The memory of the rescue, once a moment of crisis, had become a story of hope, compassion, and enduring human strength. Ultimately, the snowy night had left a permanent imprint, not only on the children and their family, but on James and the broader community as well. The children grew up with a deep understanding of courage and empathy, shaped by an experience that could have ended tragically, but instead became a source of inspiration. James, too, carried the memory as a quiet reminder of what it meant to act selflessly and with purpose. The story of the night in the snow became a living lesson, that one person's choice to act with courage and compassion can change lives forever. Even years later, when the children had grown taller and more independent, they would occasionally visit the forest where their lives had almost ended. They would remember the fear, the cold, and the uncertainty, but also the warmth, the reassurance, and the bravery of the man who had saved them. And they would smile, knowing that a single act of kindness had shaped their future in ways they could never forget. For James, the story was complete not in headlines or recognition, but in the quiet knowledge that his actions had mattered. He had changed lives, inspired a family, and left a legacy of courage and compassion. The snowy night had begun in fear and uncertainty, but had ended in hope, transformation, and the enduring proof that human kindness, when combined with courage, could truly change the world.